Welcome to Histyear. In each episode, we open the gates of a single year and wander through the misty paths of history, stepping into the shadows of the past. Today, we open the door to the year 1772. While the palaces of Europe glittered with splendor, the cries of millions struggling with hunger echoed across distant lands. In some places, whispers of ghosts spread through the night. In others, the notes of a young genius filled grand halls. On this journey, we will explore a year where magic and science, love and war, intertwined in unforgettable ways. Asterisk. The mysterious fires that shook Europe. In the summer of 1772, London's narrow streets were swallowed by oppressive heat and the sharp scent of smoke. As townspeople went about their daily lives, dark plumes suddenly began rising from different quarters. Wooden rooftops, crowded marketplaces, warehouses full of goods. Flames spread across the city like a burning shroud, yet no one could explain their origin. No bakery explosion, no accident, almost as if an invisible hand wished to punish London itself. Terrified citizens began spreading countless rumors. Some called the disaster the wrath of the devil, while others believed secret societies had set the city ablaze through dark magic. Memories of the Great Fire of London in 1666 were still vivid. Now, these new blazes made people fear that the ancient curse had returned. Today, historians insist there was nothing supernatural behind it. They point instead to simpler causes: sparks leaping from timber houses, poorly built chimneys, human carelessness. But for Londoners of that time, such explanations were never enough. On those nights when the flames painted the skies a deep crimson, the line between reality and legend blurred with terrifying ease. The First Partition of Poland. That same year, another event shook the political balance of Europe. The First Partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Russia, Prussia, and Austria sat around a table, drawing lines on maps, and carved Poland's lands into three pieces. Once a powerful center in Eastern Europe, the Commonwealth was now being dragged toward the loss of its independence. This division changed the fate of ordinary people overnight. A peasant who awoke in the morning suddenly found himself no longer a subject of Poland, but of Prussia. In city squares, people whispered anxiously, "Have we become strangers in our own land?" Meanwhile, the newspapers tried to present the agreement as a way of preserving balance. But deeper in the layers of history lay another cause for the downfall. The Polish nobility, known as the szlachta, had long valued their own privileges above the strength of the state. The kingdom had grown fractured within and weak without. That weakness was an open invitation to its ambitious neighbors. Thus, the First Partition of Poland was not merely an attack from outside, it was also the inevitable result of division from within. In those days, some tried to console the people by calling Poland's misfortune God's justice. Yet in truth, what happened was one of history's harshest realities. When unity fades, powerful neighbors never miss their chance. James Cook's Antarctic Voyage. While European cities struggled against raging fires, a very different story was being written on distant seas that same year. James Cook set sail on his second great voyage aboard the HMS Resolution. His goal was to reach the legendary Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land that had lingered like a shadow on maps for centuries. As Cook and his crew pressed forward through storm-tossed waves, colossal icebergs loomed before them, covering the sea like mountains of glass. Sailors whispered of dark shapes moving among the frozen giants. Were these the monsters of uncharted waters? Yet Cook's eyes were fixed on something else, uncovering the true face of the mysterious land that lay beyond. In 1773, he achieved what no northern ship had ever dared. He became the first man to cross the Antarctic Circle. Navigating through towering glaciers, he glimpsed the vast white continent, though he never set foot upon it. Some among the public believed Cook had reached the very edge of the world. In reality, his observations confirmed the existence of Antarctica itself. Today we know that the immense white wall he saw was not the end of the Earth, but the gateway to one of humanity's greatest discoveries. The sailors' tales of monsters lurking in endless ice were, in truth, reflections of awe and fear before the immensity of nature. The voyage that began in 1772 became a symbol of an era where science and legend intertwined on the high seas. The Danish royal scandal and execution, 1772. In 1772, the eyes of Europe turned to Copenhagen. There, a scandal had erupted that shook the honor of the royal household. Queen Caroline Matilda of Denmark was secretly in love with her husband's personal physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee. King Christian VII was known for his fragile mental health, and this gave Struensee immense influence both in the king's ear and in the affairs of the state. From Austria, from Berlin, from Paris, the same question echoed: was the queen truly in love, or had she fallen under the doctor's spell? Among the people, whispers spread that Struensee had bewitched her with secret potions and dark magic. Yet historians rarely take such rumors seriously, noting instead that Struensee was an educated and daring reformer, inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment. But once the gossip breached the palace walls, everything changed. The aristocracy, feeling its power slipping away, struck back. In a sudden coup, Struensee was arrested, while the young queen was hastily exiled from the court. Soon after, newspapers across Europe reported that the doctor had been condemned to a gruesome execution, his severed head displayed before the eyes of Copenhagen's people, a scene both terrifying and fascinating. As for Caroline Matilda, she was only 23 when she died in a foreign land, consumed by the sorrow of exile. The scandal of 1772 was not merely the tale of a forbidden love. It was also a dark reminder of how politics, intrigue, and society's prejudices could swallow the lives of two young souls. The dark days of the Bengal famine. In distant lands, on the eastern plains of India, the summer of 1772 carried the darkest shade of suffering. 2 years of drought and devastating floods had destroyed the rice fields. The soil no longer yielded its harvest. Hunger swept through the villages, and epidemics ravaged the population. Historians write that more than 10 million lives were lost in this famine. Yet it was not nature alone that magnified the disaster. The British East India Company, which ruled the region, continued to collect taxes. Even though the grain warehouses were full, instead of feeding the starving people, they hoarded the supplies to export them to Europe. Villagers could see the food grown on their own land, yet they were forbidden to touch it. Desperation turned into its cruelest form. Some communities were forced to eat tree bark and balls of mud just to survive. Among the people, dark tales began to spread. Some believed the British had driven away the rains with secret sorcery. In truth, drought and misrule had fused together, turning a natural disaster into a man-made tragedy. The dark days that Bengal endured in 1772 starved not only bodies, but the collective memory of its people. For centuries to come, the shadow of this great famine would linger, alongside the anger toward British rule. Mozart in Europe at 16. A young boy, only 16 years old, yet his fingers danced across the keys, enchanting the brightest halls of Europe with the genius of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. In 1772, as preparations for his opera Lucio Silla unfolded in Milan, the city's aristocrats watched with eager anticipation. For the work about to be staged was not written by a seasoned master, but by a youth who had not even reached adulthood. When rehearsals began, the orchestra's musicians could hardly believe their eyes. Mozart conducted even the most complex melodies as if they were a playful game, guiding the singers on stage, telling them exactly when to breathe. And when the night of the premiere arrived, the opera house was packed to the last seat. For hours, the nobles sat captivated, unable to look away from the stage. A 4-hour opera would normally exhaust even the most patient audience, but Mozart's music pulled them in like an enchanting dream. Whispers quickly spread through the crowd. Some wondered, how can a boy of his age compose such music? Surely his father Leopold must be secretly helping him. Others even spoke of mysterious powers to explain his extraordinary talent. Yet in truth, the source of this miracle was nothing more than Mozart's sharp ear, his unique genius, and his profound bond with music. That night in Milan in 1772 was a turning point. Europe was not just hearing melodies, they were hearing the first echoes of a musical revolution. At only 16, this young prodigy was destined to become the hero of a timeless story that would echo across the world. Claims of a sea monster on the Scottish shores. In the summer of 1772, tales told by fishermen along the mist-covered coasts of Scotland spread across Europe. One stormy evening, as cold winds stirred the waves, a massive shape suddenly rose from the sea, its long neck stretching toward the sky. The men on the boat held their breath. What they saw was unlike any ordinary fish. Some shouted, "A sea dragon," while others believed the shadow twisting above the water was a curse of the loch. In village squares, people whispered the story night after night. Elders spoke of ghostly whales, while others imagined a demonic creature from the depths. Today, scientists interpret these accounts differently. Huge logs lifted by the waves, schools of large fish, or the humped backs of whales might have appeared, in the frightened eyes of those fishermen, as a terrifying monster. Yet these very rumors planted the first seeds of a legend that years later would echo around the world as the tale of the Loch Ness Monster. Perhaps no one truly saw what emerged from the mist that night. But the human mind creates myths to explain the unknown, turning even a ripple into a colossal beast. And so, on the Scottish shores in 1772, a fleeting moment of fear became the beginning of a legend that would endure for centuries. The War of the Bavarian Succession, the Potato War. In 1772, Europe was restless. Thrones, lands, and crowns shifted hands in an endless game of power. This time, it was the Duchy of Bavaria at the center of the storm. Austria sought to expand its territories, while Prussia was determined to stand in the way. Two great powers confronted each other, yet the epic battlefield clashes so familiar from history books never truly came. For weeks, the armies watched each other in silence. Winter was harsh, the roads turned to mud, and supplies were scarce. Soldiers, weapons slung over their shoulders and stomachs growling with hunger, wandered into Bavaria's potato fields. They dug into the earth with their hands, pulling out tubers and feeding themselves in the midst of war. It is said that sometimes soldiers from opposing sides met in the same field, and instead of raising swords, they boiled potatoes together in the same pot. Historians note that such tales may be somewhat embellished. In reality, skirmishes did occur, and hundreds of soldiers died from hunger and disease. Yet the sight of potato fields becoming the soldiers' lifeline defined the character of this war. More than the clash of steel, it was the sound of shovels in the soil that lingered in memory. And so, Europe remembered this conflict not as a war of grand strategies, but as the Potato War. A strange chapter of 1772 that revealed a timeless truth. Sometimes, even hunger can prove a stronger enemy than the ambitions of kings. Carl Wilhelm Scheele's discovery of chlorine. In the cold lands of Sweden, beneath the dim light of a modest laboratory, a young chemist spent his days surrounded by bottles and jars. In 1772, Carl Wilhelm Scheele was on the verge of a discovery that would shape the course of history. One day, while examining his mixtures, a yellow-green gas rose from the glass tubes. It burned the lungs, bleached paper instantly, and darkened metal. To those who witnessed it, it seemed like nature's fury made visible. Villagers whispered, "Scheele has created a poisonous ghost gas. Anyone who comes near will suffocate." In truth, what happened was a turning point for science. Scheele had discovered one of the most important elements in human history: chlorine. Yet at the time, he did not realize it was a distinct element. He believed it to be a combination of other substances. Even so, his experiments opened new paths for chemistry, and in the years that followed, other researchers would uncover chlorine's true nature. But hidden within this moment was a tragic irony. Scheele inhaled the toxic gas almost daily, exposing himself to arsenic, mercury, and countless acids as he experimented in his cramped room, unaware of the danger. Many historians now believe that his early death was caused by the very poisons he studied. The man who brought light to science was slowly consumed in the shadows of his own discoveries. In 1772, the rise of that yellow-green gas was more than a discovery. It was the opening line of a cautionary tale. Knowledge can be both salvation and peril. The birth of David Ricardo, the 18th of April, 1772. On the 18th of April, in the heart of bustling London, a child was born, David Ricardo. His father was a wealthy banker, and their home echoed with the clatter of coins and the murmur of trade. Even as a boy, young Ricardo played with numbers, scribbling mysterious signs in his notebooks, trying to understand the hidden world of money. As time passed, that curious child grew into a financial prodigy. Through his dealings on the stock exchange, he amassed a fortune, especially by investing in British government bonds during the Napoleonic Wars, which suddenly made him one of the richest men of his age. Some contemporaries whispered, "He's just a banker, using his power for his own gain." But what truly fascinated Ricardo were the invisible laws behind money. The concept forever tied to his name became the theory of comparative advantage, an idea still at the foundation of economics today. To Ricardo, every nation should focus on what it could do best. Let England master cloth, let Portugal shine in wine. Trade, then, would transform from conflict into mutual gain. Over time, this vision turned into a compass for global commerce. Historians remind us that Ricardo was not only a theorist, but also a businessman forged in the very heart of trade. His ideas were sometimes misunderstood, and at times exploited by great powers for their own benefit. Yet in truth, Ricardo's aim was to propose an economic order that could open the path to peace among nations. In 1772, a baby was born who would grow to be one of Europe's brightest minds, writing not with ink on parchment, but with ideas that stretched beyond borders, crafting a timeless story of trade. Voltaire's endless debates. In 1772, Paris was remembered not only for its grand boulevards and glittering balls, but also for the sharp debates that echoed through its cafes and salons. At the center of these conversations stood one name, Voltaire. Though age had touched him with silver hair, his pen was still sharp, his words still piercing. His criticisms of the Catholic Church, his writings that questioned the absolute authority of the monarchy, and his calls for freedom of thought ignited heated polemics in France's intellectual circles. Every evening, beneath candlelight in the city's famous salons, aristocrats, philosophers, and artists gathered to discuss his works. To some, he was a hero, a sage trying to awaken the people from their slumber. To others, he was a dangerous agitator, a provocateur threatening religion and order. On one side stood those who defended the light of reason, on the other, those who upheld the untouchable sanctity of the divine order. This conflict mirrored the very spirit of the Enlightenment. Of course, rumors abounded. Some claimed that Voltaire belonged to secret societies, or even drew inspiration from demonic powers. Yet historical evidence shows that his greatest weapon was neither magic nor secret orders, but his pen, his wit, and his biting criticism. His writings reflected the voice of a philosopher who challenged the authority of the church while believing deeply in the freedom of the human mind. The endless debates that echoed through Parisian salons nourished not only the aristocrats of the time, but also the revolutionaries of the future. Perhaps the fervent exchange of ideas that stirred in 1772 was already laying the intellectual foundations of the French Revolution that would soon shake all of Europe. The rise of the Gothic novel. The year was 1772. In Europe's great cities, the days were filled with debates on reason and science, yet by night, under the flicker of candlelight, entirely different stories were told in salons. While philosophers in Paris spoke of liberty, readers wandering through London's bookshops clutched a single work in their hands, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. Though published years earlier, it was rediscovered in 1772 and began to spread across the continent like a whisper. Within the novel's dark pages loomed eerie castles, footsteps echoing through stone corridors, and ghosts emerging from blackened tunnels. Even as the Enlightenment celebrated the light of reason, people's hearts still carried a deep fascination for the night, the secrets of shadows, and the mysteries beyond. For this reason, Walpole's tale was more than just a novel. It awakened repressed fears, forbidden desires, and the hidden depths of imagination. And yet, there was a curious twist. When Walpole first published the book, he presented it as a translation of an ancient medieval manuscript. Readers of the time believed the haunted castles and ghostly figures described in its pages might truly have existed, as if they were reading authentic history. Even when it was later revealed to be nothing more than a masterful literary illusion, the spell was never broken. On the contrary, the legendary atmosphere only grew stronger. Thus, 1772 entered history as the year when Gothic literature began to rise. In the glittering salons of Europe, ghost stories whispered from mouth to mouth were, in truth, the written reflections of our deepest fears and hidden dreams. Perhaps the greatest spark to emerge from the darkness that year was the birth of a new literary genre, the Gothic novel, the splendor of Europe's royal courts. In 1772, while Europe's political stage trembled with wars and crises, a very different world thrived within the continent's grand palaces. Above all, the Palace of Versailles stood as the center of magnificence. Light cascaded from crystal chandeliers, shimmering across gilded walls. Silk gowns, billowing skirts, and towering wigs created a scene straight out of a fairy tale. Kings and queens, ministers and nobles gathered at these balls, exchanging glances to the rhythm of the dance. As the orchestra's strings echoed through the hall, guests paid as much attention to each other's garments as to the music itself. For in those days, the brilliance of the court was more than beauty. It was a display of power. The more splendid the attire, the grander the banquet, the stronger the ruler appeared. The common people could only watch from afar. While peasants groaned under crushing taxes, they heard tales of wine flowing like rivers in the palaces, of feasts served on golden plates. Some whispered bitterly, "The king's palace is clad in gold, yet there is no bread on our tables." Legend has it that when certain guests first stepped into Versailles' famous Hall of Mirrors, they believed they had entered another world. To some, the shimmering light seemed a holy miracle. To others, a devil's deception. In reality, it was a stage of magnificence, every detail calculated to display the power of monarchy. In Europe of 1772, these balls were not merely entertainment, they were stages of politics. A glance exchanged in the rhythm of a dance could spark an alliance or herald the approach of war. The mirrors of Versailles reflected not only silk dresses, but also the ambitions, intrigues, and looming transformations of Europe. The bloody days of the Ottoman-Russian War. The year 1772 marked one of the darkest chapters in Eastern Europe, when war merged with hunger and fear beneath looming black clouds. The struggle between the Ottoman Empire and the rising power of Russia had turned into a years-long contest of strength. While Ottoman soldiers fought across the steppes of Crimea and the rugged passes of the Balkans, the armies of Empress Catherine II advanced step by step, their disciplined marches and modern artillery carving out superiority. By 1772, the balance of war had clearly shifted toward the Russians. Ottoman troops retreated, villages burned, towns were plundered. Desperate civilians fled along roads of exile, while the cold Balkan winds, joined by famine and disease, deepened the catastrophe. Within the Imperial palace, unrest was brewing. On one side stood the soldiers and common people bearing the weight of the war. On the other, viziers consumed by intrigue around a weakening sultan. Whispers spread among the population. Perhaps the glorious days of the Ottoman Empire are over. Yet other rumors circulated. Some claimed the Russians had won their victories with the aid of invisible curses carried on blizzards. But historical records tell a different story. Behind this so-called curse lay Russia's new military technology, its disciplined troops, and the weakened state of an empire eroded by internal strife. By 1772, exhaustion forced both sides to sit at the peace table. The talks ended without agreement, but they were the prelude to a greater storm. Just 2 years later, the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca would be signed, remembered as one of the most devastating defeats in Ottoman history. Thus, 1772 was not only a year of war for the Ottomans, it became a dramatic turning point, marking the empire's first steps toward decline. The sound of rifles mixed with the cries of mourning, echoing across the horizon of Eastern Europe. The year was 1772. The mysterious fires that swept through the streets of London still lingered in memory. Along the misty shores of Scotland, fishermen spoke of a shadow rising from the sea, while in Bengal, millions struggled against famine. That same year in Milan, a 16-year-old Mozart enchanted audiences with his music. In the salons of Paris, Voltaire's ideas spread like sparks. The Palace of Versailles glittered with gold, even as a love story in Copenhagen ended with execution. And in the East, the Ottoman Empire endured dark days against Russia, the looming shadow of a great treaty hanging over the empire. 1772. For some, it was a year of legends. For others, a year of tragedies. And for many, the year when the gates of a new world began to open. As we close our eyes tonight, let us not forget. History can be more astonishing than the most mysterious of tales. See you on the next journey through Histyear. Don't forget to subscribe. **